The Hidden Hindu, Book 2 of the trilogy by Akshat Gupta, Chapter 3, Nanshaad. Meanwhile, up on Kailash Parbat, almost eager to know more about the legendary Milarepa, and so he asked, I have heard and read so much about you. Some stories say that you eventually retreated to dwelling in caves, but that's speculation and not the whole truth, isn't it? But firstly, how do you know about me? Milarepa looked at Ashwathama as if seeking his approval, and Ashwathama nodded reassuringly. Let me take you back to the beginning. In my younger days, fueled by pure vengeance, I destroyed many lives. I left home on my mother's request and studied sorcery to channel my hatred. My mother passed away, but I continued with my revenge, assuming that's what dutiful sons do. They avenge their mother's suffering. Numerous innocent souls had to bear the brunt of my violence. In my years of retreat, I repented my actions and became a student of Marpa, the translator. Before Marpa accepted me, I had to endure a great deal of arduous labor performing tasks that he had devised. On his orders, I would start building a tower, but halfway through he would ask me to tear it down and start from scratch. This happened again and again. I would erect the column only to raze it to the ground. After the third round of building and demolition, I was asked to construct a final multi-story tower at Say village in Lodreg, Tibet, which still stands. Eventually, Marpa accepted me as his disciple. He explained that the construction and destruction was a way for me to atone for my negative karma. Even though I understood that, I always wondered why it was always towers that he had me build. It was only when I came to India that I got my answer. Back then, though, the territory that constituted India was very different from what it is now. Marpa taught me everything he knew, and when his lessons ended, he took me to his teacher, Naropa, who was born in an upper-class Brahmin household in Bengal. This brought me to India for the first time. Many scholars of various ages were practicing sutra and tantra, like me. Upon the completion of Naropa's teachings, it was time to leave. I was uncertain about how to proceed further, so I posed my dilemma to him. A rule of aphorism in Sanskrit literature, or a set of these on grammar or Hindu law in philosophy. An strict doctrine regarding rituals, discipline, and meditation composed in the form of dialogues between Shiva and Shakti. I am grateful for your guidance, but I still don't see my true purpose, I said to Naropa. I have taught you everything I could. Now it is time you set out to find your own path again. You must journey through India to find a man named Nanshaad and seek his counsel, he said. I bade him farewell and embarked on my odyssey through India. After wandering for a few years in the quest of Nanshaad, I arrived at the city named Saket, which means heaven in Sanskrit. It was known as the land of Lord Ram and is presently called Ayodhya. There, I finally learned the whereabouts of Nanshaad. I was directed to a village he raised in approximately 640 kilometers from Ayodhya, which in modern-day Bisrak. After an exhausting journey over several days, I finally reached Bisrak, brimming with hope. At the village's entrance, the first person I came across was an old man who was working on the construction of an unfinished building. I went ahead and asked him, Do you know who Nanshaad is around here? He eyed me strangely before picking up a dry leaf off the ground and talking to it. I repeated my question in case he hadn't heard me properly the first time, but he dismissed me rudely and then continued talking to the dry leaf in his hand. I looked around to see if there was anyone else who could help me out, but it was just him with his half-built structure, and so I walked on to continue my search. For the next 3 days, I asked the natives about the man who had me tracing the country for him. It was a small hamlet, so I made sure I tried my luck everywhere, but to my grave disappointment, not a single soul knew anything about Nanshaad. With no other option left, I decided to return to Tibet with a heavy heart. On my way back, I passed the same old man who was still busy working on the incomplete structure. The villagers informed me that he was the sole laborer of whatever was standing of the structure. Given his shriveled state, it was clear that death could come knocking at his doorstep any moment. I pitied him. I had become fairly adept at building towers for Marpa, and I was also at the dead end of my quest for Nanshaad. Considering the building's completion to be the old man's last wish, I decided to help him finish the construction. I offered him my help, but he refused bluntly. I assured him that I didn't want anything in return. His age and fragility made me wonder how he had that kind of grit and motivation to build anything at that point in his life. To take the conversation forward, I asked him casually whom he was building it for. He suddenly turned towards me and asked, "Whom do you plan to do it for? For yourself or for me?" I wasn't prepared for that question at all. I stood there speechless, trying to find the answer for my own sake rather than the satisfaction of a response. Before offering him my service, I really hadn't thought about my motivation for it. The old man stared at my broad, brooding face and some time and then set a condition, as if I needed his help more than he needed mine. He said that I would not question him about anything until I finished. I agreed. Whom was I doing it for? The question became the real reason for me to finish the structure without any questioning. I accepted his condition and he accepted my offer. As I stepped inside, the old man called out for someone named Malty. In there was a large door made out of stone. It was shut, so I assumed that Malty would walk from there, but then I heard him say, "There you are, come here." I followed his gaze to see where Malty was. All I could see was a dead leaf on the ground. He was smiling down at it, and the dead leaf fluttered up to sit on his palm. That's when I realized it was actually a butterfly that looked like a dry leaf when its wings were at rest. "Meet Malty," he said. "How did you manage to tame a wild butterfly?" I asked, intrigued by what had just happened. The grave stare from his hollow eyes was enough to remind me of the condition we had just agreed upon. There was no scope for any questions. He then pointed towards the huge stone door and said, "You are not allowed to walk inside that room. Don't even try it. Malty, keep an eye on him." All set for work, I started the construction the next morning. The next few months we worked in silence. His bitterness remained a constant until the last day. He never talked to me. Every day he would open the door just enough to get in and stay locked away for 6 hours after sunset. Meanwhile, I would cook for both of us and carry on with my meditation and regular practices. Malty would always sit on the specific damp spot on the wall facing me. I tried to befriend her, but she never budged. It sometimes felt as if she was genuinely following orders and keeping an eye on me when the old man was not around. Malty would be on the look out diligently every day until one unpleasant morning when I woke up to see that she was dying. It was evident that those were her last few hours. I was feeling the loss already, but the old man remained inexpressive and unbothered. He was occupied trying to capture a lizard on the wall and needed an insect to lure it. The next thing I knew, he picked up the dying Malty and used her as bait. That heartless bastard, pardon my language, but it was just infuriating. As the lizard inched closer to Malty, she turned towards me, and I imagined her vulnerability. In the blink of an eye, the lizard gulped Malty alive. Her dead leaf wings fell on the ground, and the lizard chewed up her remnants while the old man watched the gruesome scene with much excitement. He carefully took the lizard off the wall and began walking towards his room. When he looked back at me, his eyes were twinkling and he cupped the reptile in his palms. "She is pregnant. Her offspring will be my next pet," he said, walking like a mischievous child back to the forbidden room and locking himself in again. Malty's isolated wings blew with the wind as dry leaves usually do. I was dejected, but more than that, I was curious to know what exactly he did behind that door. But questioning him was forbidden. I had sweated with him for several months, yet he had not even bothered to ask me my name. Regardless, I continued my work as promised. A few days later, he came up to me with a tiny lizard on his palm. It was a male lizard this time, which had never seen its mother because he had killed her along with the rest of her litter and eaten them. He named this new pet Kark. A couple of weeks passed by, and Kark became the new resident of Malty's damp spot, keeping an eye on me in the old man's absence. In the following 6 months, I built the pillars of the veranda the central structure over the roof, and the passages on the sides. At some point during the construction, I began to apprehend that this was no ordinary building. It had a special purpose. Given the old man's frail physique, I suspected that I would never learn his true intentions. His cremation might just predate the construction completion. During those months, I also witnessed many other sorcerers and yogis come to Bisrock in search of Nanshaad. The old man ignored all their inquiries as he had ignored mine, and I gave the same answer to all of them, that there was no such man in the village. Days turned into nights, and after a whole year, the construction was finally complete. That day, I finally realized that the structure was actually a shrine for some deity. The external architecture suggested that the forbidden room was actually the sanctum, and its design was unlike that of any other Hindu temple I had seen or heard of before. That night, I stayed up late to clean the place, while the old man remained locked in as usual. It had been only a few years since I had moved to India from Tibet, and I was still in the process of learning about its soul, culture, and religions. I learned that in Hindu rituals, the ceremony of establishing the deity's idol in the temple is called Sthapana, which was going to take place the next day. It was dawn. The old man woke me up and asked me to leave instantly as my work was finished. I realized that I was no longer bound by his condition of not asking any questions. Recalling the question he had asked me in the beginning, I finally answered him. You asked me who I was doing it for, remember? I did not know which god this shrine was being erected for, so I didn't do it for divinity. After leaving this place, I will be moving on with my life, so I certainly did not do it for myself. That leaves you, so I built this for you. Eyeing the heavy stone door, I asked, who did you build this for? I ask you a single question, but you seek two answers. I shall answer only one, after which you must leave. Decide for yourself which question is more significant to you, replied the rude and stubborn old man. But I had asked him just one question, so I was confused. I wanted to ask him what the other one was, but given his curt demeanor, I knew that I would be left with both my queries and zero answers. Hurry up, I haven't to initiate the proceedings of Sthapana. I don't have all day for you to respond. The old man was losing patience. Before I could respond, a wandering scholar stopped by and asked him, do you know who Nanshaad is here? I looked at the old man with startling realization. That was what he meant by two questions. The scholar waited for a few moments, but when he got no response, he walked to the other side to ask someone else. I decided to take my chance. Answer my first question, I said with wide, hopeful eyes. Kark climbed on him and sat on his shoulder. He looked at Kark, caressed him under his chin, and sighed, I am the name which brought you all the way to Bisrock. I am Nanshaad. And then he retreated to the forbidden room, leaving me baffled with my eyes fixed on him. I'd been working the entire year for the man I came in search of without knowing that he was indeed the one. Dawn changed to dusk, and soon the stars came out. I simply sat there waiting for him to come out. Never before that day had Nanshaad stayed indoors for that long. Long past midnight he finally emerged and found me standing right where he had left me. With no trace of surprise in his expression, he went back inside, leaving the door open. For the first time in a year, I took a glimpse inside. An incredible force of energy radiating from the sanctum engulfed me. After several years, I felt the same level of malice and hatred coursing through me. But this time, the fury was accompanied by immense strength. I was absorbing so much power that I started bleeding from my nostrils. Within a few moments, my consciousness left my body and I dropped down to the ground. The last thing I saw before my eyes shut completely was a hazy figure, and it was certainly not Nanshaad. When I regained consciousness, half my clothes were soaked in blood. Kark was sitting on my chest, looking into my eyes, and the Sthapana was already done. I got up to face a huge statue standing almost 20 feet tall, with 10 heads and numerous hands wielding weapons. Covered in ornaments of gold, it was placed on the platform that I had constructed for the deity. The sculpture emanated great intensity in its expression and posture. Whose idol is this? I asked as I breathed in awe. Before Milarepa could quote Nanshaad, Ashwathama chimed in. Ravana, the demon king of Lanka. Meeting Om's eyes, he continued, Vishrak is situated in what is now Greater Noida in Uttar Pradesh and is believed to be the birthplace of King Ravana. The land has ancient temples in abundance. The Swayambhu Shiva Linga, which was worshipped by Ravana and his father Vishravas, was unearthed there over a century ago. It is octagonal in shape. The linga protrudes 2.5 feet above the ground and allegedly extends 8 feet underneath. It is deified in a temple built near a large banyan tree and has a courtyard laid with marble where devotees worship daily. Milarepa nodded in agreement and added, I constructed this underneath sanctum before 1135. Now a new shrine dedicated to the Demon King is under construction, comprising a 42-foot Shiva Linga and a 5.5-foot sculpture of Ravana. I was never aware that I was laboring over the development of Ravana's temple. But I ask you how you knew about me. What does all this have to do with me and my question? Om's impatience was obvious. It is essential for you to know why and how I met Nanshaad, and who he was, because he has everything to do with you and your question. So listen carefully. Ravana went by numerous names like Dasis Ravana, Dasis Sagavithi, Maharavana, Dashanan, Lankeshwaran, Ravashanashwaranam, Ilavendar, and Ravula. Yes, I know that. So write down Nanshaad, and read it backwards. Complied. Once written and read in reverse, became Dashanan, which was one of Ravana's popular names. Milarepa continued. Like Ravana, Nanshaad also had many titles. One of them is Nagrendra, the name that you once knew him as. Was staggered to hear Nagrendra's name fall out of Milarepa's mouth. What happened then? Then I left empty-handed from Vishrak after the Strahapana and Dashanan, replied Milarepa. With that, Om's curiosity rose to a higher pitch than ever before. But he was not alone in that. The same curiosity was agitating Primul and LSD, who were on their way to Kailash at that moment. The journey from Digha Beach had started 9 days prior to the perfect crescent moon. They had traveled for 22 hours to reach the Nathula Pass for their first halt. At night, they checked into a secluded motel. After a quick dinner, they decided to meet in Nagrendra's room. Primul stood beside LSD, waiting for further instructions from Nagrendra, who was focused on the torn piece of the map spread out on an old wooden table. Nagrendra began. There are 2 ways to reach Kailash from India. One is through the Lipulek Pass in Uttarakhand, and the other is through the Nathula Pass in Sikkim. The Lipulek Pass used to be a popular option earlier, but is now damaged due to the floods in Uttarakhand. The route via Sikkim crosses the India-China border at the Nathula Pass, pointing to the dots marked on the route. Nagrendra started explaining the road map. From Nathula tomorrow we will travel to Kangma, which is 185 kilometers away. Then we will cover 295 kilometers to Lazi, and then another 477 kilometers to Zongba. An additional 477 kilometers to Zongba will lead us to Darshan and later to Kwagu. This route from Nathula Pass takes around 5 days and also offers a shorter transit to Kailash. We have spent 1 day out of 9 already to reach Nathula, which leaves us with 8 days to reach Kailash on the perfect crescent moon night, which means we have 3 days to spare, Primrose reasoned. No, we are already running 2 days late when we will have to compensate for them, Nagrendra corrected. But you said 5 days, LSD interjected. 5 days on wheels. We are going on foot. The trek to Kailash is ideally undertaken between the months of April and May and October to November. Trekkers are advised against carrying out an expedition in the 5 months, from November to December to March to April, and as it becomes tough to breathe and survive there. We have chosen to travel in January to February, which is the coldest and most difficult time of the year in that range. The roads are blocked and there is no commutation to our destination. This is why we require 10 days or even more. Anyway, the night is growing darker. Go get some rest because you won't be able to get any for a long time after tonight. We leave tomorrow before sunrise. Nagrendra closed his eyes and sat down to meditate, indicating that he had answered the last question for the day. At 4 a.m, the team left for Kangma and then on to Lazi. Lazi. The next 2 junctions en route to Kailash, Primo, walking with LSD almost 100 meters behind Nagrendra, looked at the sky and found the waning gibbous moon, signifying that barely 8 days were left for the crescent moon to be seen. What is it with the night of the crescent moon? Primo asked LSD. You will get the answer when the time is right, LSD responded curtly as they walked. And who are you? When is the right time to get an answer for that? He frowned. LSD thrust her chin out towards Nagrendra, who was walking ahead of them. Why don't you just ask him all these questions? She challenged, assuming that this would shut him up.